Okay, well, let's get back into opportunity costs. So earlier we said we're only looking at incremental costs. And we said that there were ones that are going to occur as a result of the project, only as a result of the project happening, or we need to think about things that could occur if we didn't do the project. And that's what these opportunity costs are things that could occur if we don't. So they're the cost of the things that we could do if we didn't do the project. And so you think about how you spend your time. Time's a scarce resource. Some of you might have taken a nap yesterday. What could you have been doing instead of the nap? Say again?
That was day 2 yesterday, my bad, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. So, back to the story. If you could have been doing your Finance 780 homework, right? So you think about what is the next best use of whatever this resource is. That's your opportunity cost. And so we are going to see that we have opportunity costs in projects all the time. So let's start with an example. How about an empty building that the company owns? It's completely paid for. And we are going to start with a new manufacturing operation. And putting the manufacturing operation in that building is not going to change our taxes or our expenses on the building, anything like that. So nothing's going to change. We already own the building free and clear. Should we include a cash flow to represent the building in our project? You got a 50-50 shot here.
Yes.
Yes, very good. He got that one. Now, let's ask him why.
No idea.
Okay, very good. So we'll work with that. You'll get your gold star for today. Back to the story. What could we do with the building if we didn't use it for the project?
Can you lease it out?
Say again?
Can you lease it?
Yeah, you could lease it out, or just to make our stuff easier here, how about let's say we could sell it, right? Because selling just gives us one cash flow. And so then the question becomes, well, how do we find out what a good estimate of the value of that building is? Any ideas?
Appraisal?
Yeah, an appraisal is the first thing students mention, and an appraiser is someone that comes out and looks at your stuff and compares it to other properties and gives you an appraisal report, and they charge money for that. How could we get such a report for free? What other kind of person do you think is interested in placing values on buildings? Say again? Yeah, a realtor. So in this case, it's a commercial realtor, but I'll start by telling you about every time I sell a house. Here's what I do. I reach out to 3 realtors, and I say, number 1, I am thinking about selling my house. Have I said that I am selling my house? No. Number 2, I'm interviewing realtors. Even if I decide to sell my house, there's not certainty that you're going to get the job, right? And then I say, would you be interested in making a proposal to represent my house? And what do they always say? Yes. And then they make an appointment to come see me in the evening, my wife and I, and we sit at the table. By the way, they ring the doorbell, and it's always a woman who's a little overdressed and wearing a little too much perfume and a little too much jewelry. And I was telling this story one time in a class, and this guy busted out laughing, and I said, what's funny? He says, that's my mom. Okay, so this is typical realtor. But back to the story. So I have the realtors in, and they're all going to show up with a big, thick binder. And the first part of that binder is going to be about how they're so great. I was $1 million seller in 2017, $1 million seller in 2018, and da-da-da-da-da. And then they're going to tell you about all the work they do with handicapped squirrels in the park or something like that to try to make you feel really good about them as a person, right? And then, and so far, I'm just kind of like putting up with it and eating the cookies, because sometimes they bring cookies. Okay, so now we get to the part where I start to get interested. And she says, I looked at some other houses, some recent sales in your neighborhood. These are the comparable sales. And then she walks through about how much each of these houses sold for on a square foot basis. And what makes those houses different, better or worse than mine, and what kind of adjustments she thinks are necessary to get us where we need to be on this. And then finally, the number I've been waiting for, she tells me what she thinks my house is worth. I say, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I will be in touch either way. Once again, I'm letting her know it's not a done deal. And so I get my numbers here, and let's just make up some numbers. I get 375, 385, and 435. Any thoughts on those three numbers? Does one of them look different? 385 looks
Well,
different?
if it's a pattern.
The one at the floor.
You're overthinking this. One of them is like way bigger than the others, right?
Yeah.
Phew. Okay, so 435. Do you think the realtor really thinks your house is worth 435? No. What's that realtor doing? Trying to get the contract. And why does she think that throwing this number out is going to make me go with her versus someone else?
You're greedy.
Yeah. And so it relies on people to be both A, greedy, and B, stupid, which is a pretty powerful combination, right? And pretty common. And so, and especially if you only sell a house once in a blue moon, you have no idea how this game is played. So what I would do is, out of these three numbers, I would immediately just toss that one out. Now, if I want to get what I think the true value of my house is based on the remaining two, what should I do?
85.
So I've got 375 and 385. What do you think I should do? Yeah, I just average them, right? I just average them, and it would come out to be what, 380,000? So this is basically what we're doing with the commercial space. We get the commercial realtors in, we get the quotes. Oh, and by the way, if we decide not to do this project, what might we do with the building? We might sell it, right? And if we sell it, we're going to go with one of those three people we talked to, right? Because it's not worth our time to call in three more people. And so we're not truly lying to these people when we tell them we're thinking about selling, because it could entirely go that direction. Okay, so I don't want you to feel bad about that. Now, the other thing you need to know is that this opportunity cash flow, the opportunity cost cash flow has to be after expenses. And so when I sell commercial real estate, the brokerage fee is usually around 10%. So am I going to get my full 380,000? No, I'm going to have to subtract 38,000 off of that. And then if there's taxes and fees and other sorts of stuff, we're really looking at what kind of cash comes back to the company after all that crap is paid. Because we're wanting, remember in finance, we care about cash, cash, cash. And so we can't take credit for fees and stuff that we're going to have to pay. Okay, now what about, so we know that we should include buildings because we can sell them if we don't use them. Every manufacturing facility I've ever worked in, there's always been in the corner a machine covered with a tarp. You guys know what a tarp is? Like a big dust cover? Covered by a tarp. And on like the second day, not the first day, because you know you look a little nosy, but the second day I always go under and look underneath and see what it is. And I ask around, hey, what is that? But it's there. Now, what if we decided that we could use that machine in our operation for a new project? But it's all paid for, it's all depreciated out, it's just sitting there in the corner, and lo and behold, it's in perfect working condition. Should we include any cost for that machine in our analysis? Mr. Hawkes, what could we do with the machine if we don't use it in the project?
Sell it.
You could sell it. You could sell it. As a result, it's an opportunity cost. And so once again, we're trying to put a value on that, and it's a little different process to do that. There are these people called machine dealers. Remember, a dealer is someone that holds an inventory and stands ready to buy or sell. And so the machine dealer is someone that will come around and buy your used machines, and they also sell used machines. And so if I wanted a number on the value of this machine, what I could do is call up my machine dealer, whose name was Rusty, by the way, which I thought was a good name for a used machine dealer, Rusty. And he would come out and take a look at it and tell me what he would pay for it. Now, I might want to get 2 other dealers to give me a quote on the machine. Now this time, do I have to throw out the high estimate? No, because this guy has said he would pay me that money, right? It's not like, this is the difference between a dealer and a broker. Does the realtor ever buy your house? No. But this machine dealer is offering to buy the machine for the high price, so I can actually go ahead and use that high number. But that's what I have to put in there for an opportunity cost, because if I don't use it in the project, I could sell it and I could get the money. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's see. So we always include opportunity costs in our analysis. But I want to tell you, one of the assumptions that we make is we assume that all opportunity costs are returned to us at the end of the project. Let's talk about why that is. If at the end of the project, let's talk about the building. I take out all the machines and I've got everything back to the way it was. What can I now do with the building? Same thing I could before, right? I could sell it. And so the opportunity cost that we incurred at the beginning, we get that money back at the end. Now, when I was first giving this talk, students would tell me, by the way, this was 2004 maybe, when I was first giving this talk. And my students said, well, wait a minute, real estate's always worth more at the end than it is at the beginning. So you should probably put in some sort of estimate for how much the real estate's going to go up. And I said, folks, real estate doesn't always go up. And these people who in their lifetime had always seen real estate go up said, you're crazy. Then the big real estate bust happened in 2008, 2009. And the students told me, but real estate always goes down, right? So you should assume you're going to get less at the end. And I said, you know, real estate doesn't always go down. We don't know what direction it's going to go. So the very best thing we can do is to just say that we can get that money back at the end. Does that make sense? Ms. Wabi, are you okay? A little sleepy? Me too. Okay, back to the story. So, do we include sunk costs? No. Do we include opportunity costs? Yes. Okay, now we're going to talk about side effects. And if you ever watch television or YouTube advertising and they're talking about drugs, they're always telling you that how this drug is going to make you grow new hair, it'll make your arthritis go away, something like that. That's the main effect of the drug. But then, at the bottom, or in very small voice, they say, side effects may include dry mouth, nausea, vomiting, and all sorts of paranoia, things, suicidal intentions. They name off all these things, and those are called side effects. Now, my question to you is, should you pay attention to the side effects when deciding whether or not to take the drug? Absolutely. There's some of these side effects my wife's like, wow, that sounds worse than the thing it's trying to cure, right? There's this one hair loss drug that it causes you to lose control of your bladder. And yeah, I'm not sure that's a good trade-off, right? I'd rather be bald and dry. Anyway, back to the story. Okay, so we know we should consider side effects of taking drugs, and we should also consider the side effects of our projects. Now, what kind of side effects are we talking about? We're talking about changes in the cash flows of other projects that occur as a result of taking on this project. So, there are two kinds of side effects. Number one, they're the happy ones, the synergy side effect, which is where doing this project increases sales or cash flows in another one of our projects. So that's happy. And then we have the other side of that, and it's called erosion or cannibalism. By the way, synergy is the whole 2 + 2 = 5 thing. where you put these two projects together and the value of the two together is worth more than just the sum of the parts? Okay, so that's synergy. Erosion, if you've ever been to the Grand Canyon, you've seen the evidence of erosion. Wind, water have worn those rocks away over the year and left a big hole in the ground. And then we also call the bad one cannibalism. What is a cannibal?
Someone who eats their own species.
Yeah, it's an animal that eats its own species. And so we know that there are some, in the South Pacific, there are some human cannibals. We also know that in the animal kingdom there are a lot, and one that you may not know about is the chicken. Did you know that chickens are cannibals? If you get one chicken in the flock that is like sick and the other chickens will peck it to death and eat it. Chickens are vicious. And that's why I never feel bad when I'm eating my Chick-fil-A sandwich, because I know the chicken is an evil creature with a dark heart, right? Not a problem. You never hear of cows pulling that crap. Okay, so that's cannibalism. Now, what does this have to do with finance? Well, erosion, we're talking about the new project wearing away the cash flows of the old projects, right? That would be the way to think about erosion. In cannibalism, you can think of the new project eating the cash flows of the old project. Now, just because something is cannibalistic doesn't mean it's not still worth doing, because we still could be better off. We need to make sure that we're better off after we account for that impact of cannibalism. So let's talk about the cannibalism and some examples here. Well, actually, we'll talk about synergy and cannibalism. And I gotta probably update my stuff here at some point, because some of you were probably not even born when iTunes came out.
Oh, it came out.
Yeah, 2001. Anyone here born after 2001? Oh, good. You? See, I knew there was someone. Okay, back in the dark days, before you were born, how did we get music online?
Napster.
Yeah! We stole it, right? And now, hey, statute of limitations are up, so you don't need to call the FBI on me, but that's basically, in fact, there was an entire dorm at Kent State University that like got busted in some huge raid because they had a big server sitting up there and they were using the university's broadband to, oh yeah, it was wild times. Okay, so, but for those of us that do have a conscience, Steve Jobs knew that we would like to be able to get music legally. And so he starts iTunes, and basically you could buy any song you wanted for 99 cents. That's what it was in the beginning. Now here's the problem though. When he starts iTunes, you can only download the music to your computer. And you can only listen to the music at your computer. And so if you wanted to take your tunes with you on the go, you had to carry your laptop around. And remember, laptops were bigger back then. You had to carry your laptop around, and you got your big old headphones on, right? You look like a total dork. Okay, so it wasn't a big immediate boom, right? But then he expanded it. It started originally just on Macs, and then he expanded it for Windows. But the big boom came for iTunes when they introduced the iPod. Because now you could carry your music around in something about this size, and you could use those earbuds, which they advertise as being fun and sexy compared to those big old things that they're selling now. You know, the Dr. Dre Beats kinds of things. Okay, so what do you think happened to sales at iTunes as a result of the introduction of the iPod? Yeah, they went up because there's more utility to this now. I don't have to carry my computer around like a big doofus, right? I can have my sexy iPod. Now, here's something you need to know about the original iPod. It was $600 or something like that. Oh yeah, my office mate was a Italian opera singer guy, among other talents. He's like a Renaissance man. But back to the story. And he was really into music, and he went out and spent that money. And by the way, we only made $1,500 a month as doctoral students, so this is like a big chunk of his monthly income on this iPad. He's like, oh, but the music is so rich. Anyway, so back to the story. Now, think about that. At the time, you think someone like me is going to go out and buy an iPod? No. Okay, so it grows iTunes, but there's still potential there. Then we get the iPhone. And by the way, never buy the first of anything Apple comes out with. Never buy the first phone, watch, car, whatever they come out with. Don't buy the first one because the second one will be much better. So I don't buy the first iPhone, but I get the second one. And of course, to me, it's a computer I can hold in my hands because I frankly don't like talking with people on the phone. But to me, as an engineer, it's like a powerful computer in the palm of your hand. And I'm sitting there on the couch playing with my iPhone when I first get it, and I said to my wife, hey, this thing has an iPod built into it. What do you think I did? I go out to iTunes. And just because I got to see, were all my favorite songs from the 80s there? Because, that was my groove, right? 80s. And I get out there, and sure enough, woohoo, there they are. And so I start buying some songs on iTunes. Not a lot, I'm not crazy, but I start buying some songs on iTunes. Now, there's a synergistic effect then of the introduction of the iPhone. But can anybody give me an idea about something that the iPhone might have cannibalized? Yeah, the iPod. Why am I going to go out and spend $600 on an iPod when I can spend, at the time it was $200 plus a 2-year contract or whatever, to get the iPhone? It's a no-brainer. And so what happened to sales of iPods? Well, they cratered. Does that mean they shouldn't have made the iPhone? Absolutely not. The iPhone, in fact, it's still the biggest single source of profits for Apple, right? And so sometimes it makes sense to cannibalize your own sales. And I'll also tell you this. If you don't cannibalize your own sales, who will? Yeah, your competitors. I worked for this company. We made truck suspensions. And one of the concerns on trucks is weight, because every pound that you've got in the truck itself is a pound of cargo you can't carry. It's a pound of truck you have to carry or spin diesel to carry around. And so the lighter suspensions are always more popular. And so we came up with this new suspension. And it was a thing of beauty. It looked like it should have been a part of an airplane instead of a truck. Very light, very well designed. Unfortunately, though, it wasn't as profitable as our old style suspensions. What would have happened, though, if we had decided to just not do the new suspension and just stick with the old? Eventually, our main competitors would have done the better suspension and ate our lunch. So if you're not willing to eat your own lunch, someone else will. So always be open to cannibalizing your product line. Okay. Now you can also think through about other products. When they first come out with the iPad, do you think the iPad ate into iPhone sales? No, it's true. It's a different thing. Then, and I've got the iPad, and of course the second one. I never buy the first, but I get the second one. And I'm sitting there with it, and I'm playing with it, and I thought, you know what? My dear mother would certainly enjoy having one of these to look at that ridiculous Facebook that she loves so much. And it was getting close to Christmas, and I'm like, because it's $500. I mean, I love my mom, but it's $500. And then they came out with the iPhone Mini. And the iPhone Mini was only $350. What do you think Mom got for Christmas? The iPhone Mini. Now, not the iPhone, the iPad Mini. It's basically eroding sales. But do you think there were people who could now afford an iPad Mini that could not afford the full-size iPad? Absolutely there was. And I also told myself, with her old hands, it's probably easier to hold something smaller. Then she saw mine, and she says, wow, yours is so much bigger. I can read it so much easier. I would have much rather had one of those. What does she get for the next Christmas? The full-size one, right? Okay, so we see it all around us, and if you think about it, you could probably think about your own examples for this. Questions? Okay, now we're going to do this Baldwin Company example, and that's what I've handed out to you here. But before we jump into it, I want to talk about some of the formulas that we're going to be using. And I've written them up here on the board. And by the way, do you think that this would be a good thing to have in your notes? Yeah, and I'll leave it up here, and if you want to take a picture of it at the end of class, you're more than welcome to do so. Of course, you can always review the video and get it that way too. And let's start with what we're trying to do here. Let's think about, we're going to do NPV analysis. And we know that NPV talks about the initial cash flow and the cash flow subsequent to the initial investment, but it's all about cash flows. And the question is, what kind of cash flow are we interested in doing this discounting on? And the answer is the cash flow from assets. The cash flow from assets. That's what CFFA stands for. You could write that down if you don't remember. By the way, this stuff was all basically, most of it was in chapter 2, which you're supposed to have learned about before you even showed up here, but I gave it to you anyway. But this is all chapter 2 stuff down to a bit. Now, CFFA is equal to OCF. What is OCF? Operating cash flow minus, and what's NCS? Net capital spending minus, by the way, what's the triangle? Change. Greek letter delta means change in science and engineering and finance. So it's the change in NWC. What's NWC? Net working capital. And by the way, this is the definition for net working capital down here. Current assets minus current liabilities. Hopefully you remember that. Okay. Now let's talk about what we need to get OCF. We need EBIT. What's that?
Earnings before interest.
Very good. Earnings before interest and taxes. And then we need to add back depreciation. Why do we have to add back depreciation? Yeah, it's a non-cash expense. We still have to subtract out our taxes though. Now, a lot of times people will say, wait a minute, what about interest? And if you think back to chapter 2, one of the things that are brought up there was that accountants and finance people have arguments about whether interest is an operating cost or a financing cost. And accountants want to argue that it is an operating cost because it shows up in the income statement because it impacts your taxes. On the other hand, finance people think it's a finance cost because it's the money that you're paying to finance your operation. And so, of course, we're right. And so that's why we have to, we're not worried about interest here. In fact, I want to make this big impression on you here. We never include interest cash flows in our project. We never include interest cash flows in our project. You say, wait a minute, don't we have to account for the cost of financing these assets? Does anybody have any idea how we're going to account for that financing cost if we do not include interest? Any ideas? Ms. Menace, you're having a good day. Would you tell us what you think, how you think we're accounting for the cost of financing?
Do we just build it into the original price?
No, swing and a miss. Ms. Volkova, how do you think we're going to account for the financing cost? Let me give you a hint. Chapter 12. What was Chapter 12 all about?
Installing.
Risk, cost of capital, and capital budgeting.
Yes.
Okay, and we talked about coming up with the required rate of return for the project, right? That required rate of return represents the cost of financing based on the risk of those assets. And so that's how we're going to do this here. We are going to use that discount rate that we came up with in Chapter 12. That is going to account for our financing costs. So you never are going to see interest, you're never going to see dividends, you're never going to see any of those sorts of things in the project because the costs of financing are already built into that discount rate. Okay. Now let's talk about ATSV. At the end of the project, we've got this machine, and we are going to sell it. Does anyone have an idea of what it's called, what the money that you get when you sell it? Say again? Salvage value. It's the salvage value. What we're interested in is the after-tax salvage value. After-tax salvage value. And the reason we're interested in after-tax, of course, is because we're interested in the cash that's actually going to come into our grubby little hands, right? Taxes we got to pay. Now, let's talk about why the money that we receive isn't necessarily the same as the after-tax salvage value. The money we're going to receive is the market value of the asset. Let's say I could sell a machine for $50,000. If I could sell the machine for $50,000, but it's on my books fully depreciated out, that means I have over depreciated the asset. If I have over depreciated the asset, have I underpaid or overpaid my taxes? Yeah, if I've over depreciated, I've underpaid my taxes. And so when this book value is lower than the market value, this thing means we've over depreciated the asset, so we've underpaid our taxes, and so we're going to have to pay taxes on that difference. Well, what about if the machine still has a book value, but it has no market value? I'll give you a couple of examples how this can happen. One was from Duncan, Oklahoma. We were machining magnesium. Magnesium is what they put in fireworks to make them really bright and sparkly. Magnesium burns like crazy. In fact, magnesium, you can't put out the fire with water. And so when we have a shop order for working on magnesium, the first instruction says, get a bucket of sand. What do you think we're going to do with the sand? Yeah, that's what you're going to smother the fire with because you can't hit it with a fire extinguisher. You can't hit it with water. It's not going to work. Okay, so one time on the night shift, and remember, the night shift is where the new people and the not so sharp people are. We have a guy that's doing magnesium. And, of course, he forgets to get the bucket of sand. And so he's machining along, and sure enough, the part catches fire. What do you think his first instinct is? What? Yeah, he's going to try blowing it out and hose and whatnot. But then he remembers, aha, you got to have sand. So then he runs to get the sand, and by the time he comes back, what do you think the machine looks like? That stuff burns hot, right? This is just like a smoldering pile of ashes when he returns. And it was like freaking metal, and now it's gone. That machine had a book value of $50,000. What do you think is going to be the market value of that machine now? Right? And so we have under depreciated that asset, which means we have overpaid our taxes, so we're going to get a tax refund. Because after all, if the book value is bigger than the market value, this thing's going to be negative. And a negative times a negative is a positive. That's a rather extreme example of how you could have a book value that was higher than a market value. Here's a more common one. Semiconductors. You guys know what those are? Computer chips? The way that you make computer chips better, faster, everything, is to make the little tiny wires that connects all the crap inside smaller and smaller and smaller. And they're putting them in on a nanometer kind of range. A nanometer is like 1 × 10⁻⁹ meters. So it's just tiny, right? Okay, so now we're looking at, in the beginning, of course, we're looking at probably dozens of nanometers. And then now we're down to 14 nanometers. So I go out and I buy a bunch of 14 nanometer machines, and I am feeling great until 2 years from now, someone comes out with 9 nanometers, right? 9 nanometers. Now, my 14 nanometer equipment is obsolete, right? If I want to compete in the high-end chip business, I have to switch over to 9 nanometers. So when I get rid of those machines, when I sell them, I most likely will not get the full book value that I have on the books out of them, because after all, if they're obsolete, not as many people are going to want them. There will still be people that want them to make chips for things like coffee makers and things like that, lower end stuff. But it's not going to be the same kind of money that I would have gotten out of if it had been still one of the mainstream machines. Okay, so in that case, I would get a tax rebate, a tax refund. Questions? Okay, now let's talk about book value. Book value at time t is the historical cost, which is, by the way, what we paid up front, minus the accumulated depreciation. Accumulated depreciation is all the depreciation that's ever been charged against that machine. And so each year, the accumulated depreciation gets higher, higher, higher. And as that accumulated depreciation gets higher, then the book value gets lower, because after all, historical cost is going to stay the same. We typically depreciate down to 0. And so at the end, your accumulated depreciation is going to be equal to your historical cost, and your book value will be 0. Now, I personally don't like dealing with accumulated depreciation. To me, it's just one more thing that you have to calculate. And so instead, what I do in my projects is I say that today's book value is equal to last year's book value minus this year's depreciation. This year's book value is equal to last year's book value minus this year's depreciation. And once we get into the spreadsheet and start building these things out, you're going to see how that makes our lives a whole lot easier. Okay. Now, we are also going to assume that net working capital is equal to 0 at the end. So, can someone give me examples of the kinds of things? Let's start with current assets. Can someone give me an example of current asset? Cash. Anytime you start on a new project, whether it be in industry or in your own life, you always need more cash as a result. Example, anytime my wife and I move into a new house, I always end up spending $5,000 to $10,000 I didn't intend to spend. I don't know what's going to come up, but I know something's going to come up. Things like, this couch doesn't work. Now, I have no idea what that means, but I know enough to just buy another couch, right? So this couch doesn't work. Okay, so anytime you start off on a new project, that's how it works. So let's pick on Mr. Sadai here. Mr. Sadai, you're originally from Nepal.
Yes, sir.
And then you moved to China?
I did.
You did. When you went to China, did you show up with no money in your pockets?
No, I had money.
Yeah, you had to have money because he's starting a new project. Now, when he leaves China to come to the U.S., does your China amount of walking around money work for you here?
No.
No. He needs more cash. Now, when this whole project's over, and let's say you've already said you like to go back to Nepal. Let's say that you go back to Nepal, you're living with your family again. Do you need all that cash?
All that cash.
Do you need to have that much extra cash laying around when you are back home with your family?
No.
Absolutely not. Probably your mom will feed you if you ask nicely, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what's my point here? The cash, if we need the extra cash at the beginning of the project, once the project's over, we no longer need that cash. And so we can actually put that cash back to where it came from. Let's call it the mothership, the profitable company that is doing this project. They gave us the money in the beginning. That's where that money is going to go back to. Now, let's talk about another kind of current asset. Any ideas? Inventory. What kinds of things are in our inventory? Any and everything. Wow. He's so inclusive. Okay, so let's talk about raw material, right? You've got to have, assuming we're making something, you've got to have the raw materials. And so if you're making cars, it's like steel, rubber, glass, that sort of stuff. You've got those raw materials. And then you've got what's called WIP. What does that mean?
Work in progress.
Work in progress or work in process, and whichever way I say it, I always get corrected by someone else. So you just call it WIP. Now, not nearly as kinky as it sounds, right? It's just the stuff that's not quite done, right? So we've got our raw materials here. We've done a little work on it, but it's not quite ready to go out. And so that's our second type of inventory. And what would be the final type of inventory that we're talking about?
Finish.
Yeah, the finished goods. So when you get through making stuff, you've got this inventory of finished goods that are ready to ship to the customer. So think about this in the beginning. We have no need for any of these things for our project because the project doesn't exist. But when we are winding up on it, when we're getting going on this project, we're going to have to buy raw materials. So that's going to make inventory go up. As we start to run the machine, we're going to get work in process. That's going to make inventory go up. And then we're going to have finished goods start piling up at the end of the line. That's going to make inventory go up. So all those things are going to make inventory go up. Now let's think about the other end of the project. At the end of the project, I'm going to take what's left of that raw material, I'm going to throw it into the machine, turn it into work in process, it's going to shoot out the other end as finished goods, and what am I going to do with the finished goods? I'm going to sell them and ship them out. At that point, you see that the inventory went up over the life of the project, but then it comes back down to zero at the end. So that's another impact of working on working capital. Give me another example of a current asset. Accounts receivable. Accounts receivable. By the way, in the U.S. and mostly around the world, when we do business, we don't get cash. Instead, we sell on credit 30, 60, 90 days. Instead of receiving cash, we get what's called an accounts receivable. And so those are going to go up. As we start selling stuff on credit, our accounts receivable will grow. But over the life, when we get done, we are going to then collect those accounts receivable. And what's going to happen to AR? It's going to drop back to zero, right? And so far, our project we see is going to increase networking capital, and then it's going to, so far we haven't seen anything that goes in the other direction. But we were only talking about the current assets. Can someone tell me a current liability we should be thinking about? Yeah, accounts payable. By the way, you remember that raw material that we bought? Do you think we paid cash for that? No. It's accounts payable. And so that's going to actually, that's a current liability. So now we're saying that all these current assets are going up, but this current liability is also going up. So the question is, which predominates? And the answer is that the current assets going up through the life of the project is what predominates. And here's why. Think about assuming that we've got the same number of days to pay our suppliers as we are making our customers pay us. Certainly, the accounts receivable should be larger than the accounts payable. Because if I'm taking $1 worth of material and turning it into something that's only worth 90 cents, I've got a really bad business idea, right? And so our finished goods should be many times whatever this raw material was that we put in. And so your accounts receivable, assuming the same number of days on both ends, accounts receivable should be greater than accounts payable. Okay, so over the life of this thing, what we're seeing is at the beginning, we have to put out a lot of money to get started. And then we are going to also make some assumptions. In some cases, we just assume that the net working capital goes up at the beginning and then goes down at the end. Those are the ones that you're more likely to see on exams. But in reality, net working capital floats with sales. And here's why. If your sales double, what do you think should probably happen to your inventory? It's probably going to double along with it. What's going to happen to your accounts receivable? That's going to double along with it, right? I don't know that the cash will double for sure, but I do know that the greater the sales are, the more net working capital we're going to have to work with. And so we're going to see that as we work through this project. Now it's telling me that I have spent too long talking. I'm going to leave it like this until we're through here. Okay, so do I have anyone who does not understand why net working capital goes up at the beginning of the project and down at the end? The only thing that is moving in the opposite direction would be the accounts payable, but accounts payable sure should be smaller than accounts receivable, and it's certainly going to be smaller than accounts receivable plus cash plus inventory. Does that make sense? Okay, so I think now it's time to talk about this project, and what we're going to do, first of all, I got to get signed back in here. I'm just going to pull up a plain old spreadsheet here. Nothing fancy, nothing up my sleeve. This is just what you would get if you opened one. And I'm going to make this thing big, so hopefully you can read it. And as we go through here, I am going to make notes and entries. And what I'm going to do is to try to have every number that I'm going to have to deal with up here in the upper left-hand corner. You're going to see there's one or two that I can't do that with, but typically that's what we're going to try to do. And the reason we do that is because we're going to build this spreadsheet out down below, and we're going to link up to those original cells. And if one of those input changes, all I have to do is go back and just change one of those cells up at the top, and all this other stuff recalculates. It just drives me nuts to see students typing numbers into spreadsheets like in 3 different places, because you'll probably remember to change 2 of them, but you'll probably forget the 3rd one. I remember I came home from engineering school and I told my mom, I said, "Mom, I learned about something amazing today." And she says, "What's that?" I said, "The spreadsheet." And she says, "We had those in 1964. I said, "In your spreadsheet, could you change one number up here and everything would automatically recalculate?" And she said, "No, we had erasers for that," right? And so that's the way old spreadsheets work. The computer spreadsheet, though, turns into the what-if machine. What if we have to pay an extra $1 million for the machine? What if the tax rate goes up to 45%? Those are the kinds of questions that we can easily answer if we set up our spreadsheet correctly. Okay, I've got to make sure this thing doesn't fall back asleep on me. So here we go. The Baldwin Company, established 1965. They make all sorts of balls. And in 2012, they identified another segment of the sports ball market, and they felt it was not adequately being served by larger manufacturers. The market was for brightly colored bowling balls. First of all, does everyone know about bowling? Right? Okay. It was a big date activity in the 80s. Take your girl bowling. See how bad her feet smelled when she took the shoes off. Okay, back to the story. Okay, so bowling. Brightly colored. What color are bowling balls typically? Black. Yeah, they're black. They're pretty bland. And so people are like, yeah, what if we come up with some really wild colored bowling balls? Wouldn't that be great? Okay. And so he says, as a result, they decide to investigate the marketing potential of brightly colored bowling balls. By the way, and they say send out questionnaires. You know, I wouldn't do that. If you were going to try to find out whether or not people liked brightly colored bowling balls, where would you go?
Bowling.
The bowling alley. And what would you do?
Ask.
Yeah. And you're gonna show them your balls, right? Get your mind out of the gutter. Another lame bowling joke, sorry. Okay. Yeah, oh yeah, it's really bad. Okay, so, yeah, you're going to take these things down there, and in order to blend in with the crowd, you're going to wear one of those white A undershirts, you know, I think they call them wife beaters, you know, and have a long neck. And we used to, back in the day, you'd have to have a cigarette, but what have they done now? They've outlawed cigarettes in bowling alleys. What's next? Okay, back to the story. So, you're going to go do your marketing, and as a result, you're going to find out that the brightly colored bowling balls can achieve at least a 10 to 15% share of the market. But some people will complain about the cost of this marketing study, which was $250,000. Hey, you remember what I told you? Every marketing study I was ever involved with, what the cost was? $250,000, right? Marketing study. Okay. And so I'm going to double click that. And then, by the way, do you see what I did there with the double click? That's how you get it to fit. I showed that to my mom. She thought it was magic. I didn't tell her it wasn't. Okay, so how much is the marketing study? $250,000. Now, as we go along here, perfectly fine to make notes. And the note that I want to make here is regarding whether or not we're going to include that number in our analysis. What kind of cost is the marketing study? It's a sunk cost. Do we include sunk costs in our analysis? Absolutely not. And so I'm going to say sunk cost do not include. I was teaching a class one time where I had them write essay answers, and this one student referred to it as a suck cost. I'm like, yeah, they really do suck, don't they? Okay. So that's the marketing study. Okay, in any case, they're now considering investing in a machine to produce the bowling balls. Bowling balls could be manufactured in a building owned by the firm and located near Los Angeles. This building, which is vacant, and the land can be sold for $150,000 after taxes. So we've got this building here, 150000. Should we include a cash flow for the building? Yes. Why, Ms. Avila?
Is it considered an opportunity?
It is an opportunity cost. And Mr. Oswogwu, do we include opportunity costs in our analysis? Yes, we do. Okay, so we're going to say opportunity costs. Okay. Well, let's see what we've got here. Working with his staff, he's prepared an analysis. The cost of the bowling ball machine is $100,000. Bowling ball machine, year zero. And you'll see why I'm doing year zero here in a little bit. $100,000. And of course, we are going to include that one because it's obviously incremental to the project. By the way, I need to save this thing. Let's see if it'll let me save it to my stuff. Browse. I'm going to save it to this PC and then I'll... I hate this. We used to be able to save stuff. See if this works. Bald one project. Okay, I'll make sure that I save this before we go because I hate to redo all this next time. Okay, so we know the bowling ball machine is going to be $100,000. And then he says the estimated market value at the machine of the machine at the end of 5 years is $30,000. Now, for those of you who are already thinking ahead, that $30,000 is this market value. That $100,000 is the historical cost that we're going to be depreciating against. Now we're going to start seeing that we can't necessarily always work in the way that we have here because now they're starting to give us information about per year. And so they give us this production information. By the way, projects always start at what year? 0. So we've got a 5-year project here, and we have, let's call this, let's call it production. How many balls are produced at time 0? No. Yeah, so day 0 is when I turn the switch on. how many, and remember, in finance, it's always the end of the period is when we see the, yeah, so there's, at time zero, there's not been anything going on between -1 and 0, so there are no sales. And so when they tell us, they list these off, that 5,000 is actually right here. 5,000, 8,000, 12,000, 10,000, and 6,000. And if I do a number wrong, please let me know, because it'll make our lives miserable later on. Okay, now I'm going to insert some lines here because we've got more stuff to put up here. They tell us the price of the bowling balls in the first year will be $20. Now let's talk about the words price and cost. You are a business. So to you, the price is the amount of money you're going to be paying or the amount you'll be receiving?
Receiving.
Yeah, receiving. And your cost is the amount you'll be paying. And it turns out that one person's price is another person's cost. Because after all, if you are pricing the ball at $20 and I go buy it from my bowling alley, that price has now become my cost. Does that make sense? Okay, so price of the bowling balls in the first year, so that's time 1. Is $20. And they tell us that the bowling ball market is highly competitive, which I did not know until I read this. So they believe that the price of the bowling balls are only going to increase 2% per year as opposed to the anticipated general inflation rate of 5% per year. So we've been given 2 pieces of information there, and it's BB price growth, and that's 0.02. I'm going to go ahead and format that as a percentage. And then we also have inflation, 0.05, and I'm going to format that as a percentage. Okay. It's funny because for the first however many times I taught this, 5% inflation sounded really high. Wouldn't you love to have 5% inflation now? Oh yeah. By the way, I remember to get out and vote today. Totally unrelated topics, right? Yeah. Okay, so what can we do here? Now that we know the price of the bowling ball at year 1, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to link up here equal to the price at time 1. Now, how am I going to get the price at time 2? What am I going to multiply by? Yeah, 1 plus that growth rate of 2%. And so I'm going to say this is going to be equal to the previous one multiplied by, open parentheses, 1 plus, and then I'm going to select this growth rate up here. Now, if I just, you guys know about pulling the little corner here and copying over? Something funky is going to happen there, because what's happening is as I move over, in the beginning it referenced this cell, but then for year 3 it referenced this cell, year 4 here, and year 5 here. So how am I going to fix that problem? I'm going to go back here, and I am going to, you put the little dollar signs to fix where it's at. Now, I never can remember whether they go first or last, so I always just hit the F4 button. It's different if you're on a Mac. You can Google it and find out. But obviously the dollar signs do go before. Oh, what's it?
Control T for Mac.
Oh, Control T for Mac. Thank you. I used to be a Mac guy, but I've forgotten everything I learned. Okay, now when we look at the book and what the book does here, they are going to round these prices to dollars and cents. And if you want to do that, there are functions in Excel to do that, but it's really not key for what we're trying to do here, so I'm not going to mess with it in the interest of time. But I'm going to put the spreadsheet out there. Feel free to play with it however you like. Okay, now that I have the number of balls that we make every year and the price that we're going to get from those balls, what can I calculate? Yeah, my annual sales. And all I'm going to do is say equal to the number of balls times the price per ball. So we're already starting to get some good solid numbers here. Okay, now let's see here. Back to the story. Conversely, the plastic used to produce bowling balls is rapidly becoming more expensive. What's the main ingredient in plastic?
The petroleum.
You guys don't know?
Petroleum thing they use.
Yeah, it's the petroleum residue. So when you get through refining gasoline and whatnot, you get, and then natural gas is also one of the big raw materials for plastics. So what does that mean really when we think the plastic price is going up a lot? It's probably because oil price is going up a lot, natural gas price is going up a lot, raw materials. By the way, is that the case right now? Yeah, overall, I mean, long term, we're looking at we've got a big swing since February 24th. Okay, so they say because of this, production cash outflows are expected to grow at 10% per year, but the first year production cost will be $10 per unit. So, cost, year 1, 10, and cost growth was 10%. Is that right? Okay, so I can put down here unit cost equal to, and I'm going to go back up here and select this. And then what am I going to do to get the unit cost for year 2? It's equal to the previous cell multiplied by what?
1 plus 10%.
Yeah, 1 plus 10%. And so it's going to be equal to the previous cell multiplied by, open parentheses, 1 plus, I'm going to select this cell. But remember what we need to do with that cell? Yeah, we got to hit F4, fix that cell reference, and then close the parentheses. I'm going to roll that on over here. What can I calculate now that I know the number of balls per year and the unit cost per ball?
Cost.
Yeah, I can figure out my variable costs. And so that's just going to be equal to the production multiplied by the price. And I'll just drag that over. Ooh, there we go. Okay, let's see what else we've got here. And also, he's determined that the incremental corporate tax rate in the bowling ball project is 34%. Okay, now let's talk about what's the correct tax rate to use. If you think back to Chapter 2, we talked about the average tax rate and we talked about the marginal tax rate. The average tax rate is where you just take the amount of tax you pay and divide by your taxable income. That's your average tax rate. What was the marginal tax rate? Say again?
It varies with the next dollar.
Yeah, so it's what am I going to pay on the very next dollar that I earn? That's your marginal tax rate. Now, thinking in terms of stuff being incremental to the project, do you think we should use the average tax rate or the marginal tax rate?
Marginal.
Yeah, the marginal. And here's why. Remember, the company's already this profitable. We're hoping to add to the top of that. And so everything on this project is going to be taxed at this marginal rate, which is usually higher than the average rate. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's where that 34% comes from. That is their marginal tax rate. Okay, now they walk through us and tell us that about net working capital. They determine that an immediate year 0 investment in the different items of working capital of $10,000 is required. I never can remember what direction it is. There we go. Okay, and then, what do they tell us about net working capital beyond that? The total net working capital for each subsequent year will be 10% of sales. You remember earlier I told you that net working capital likely tracks with sales? They're saying 10%. Now, a lot of times what people will do is they'll say it's not going to be dependent on this year's sales, it's dependent on next year's sales, because after all, we're building up the inventory for that sort of stuff. We're not going to be that complex here. We're just going to say 10% of the current period sales. So NWC, percent sales, and it's years, is it year 1 through 5? It's not going to be there at year 5, right? So this 10% only applies to years 1 through 4. Okay, so we can actually go down here now and create net working capital. And the first one times 0 is going to be equal to this 10,000 bucks. And then after that, it's equal to this sales times this 10% right here. But what do I need to do right now? I got to go to the dollar sign. So I'm going to hit F4, or we hear that it's Control T on the Mac. I'm going to hit enter, and then I will be able to drag this thing over. And there is our net working capital, except for one thing. We know that it's 0 at the end because all that money goes back. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save this. And there's another thing we can calculate right now. Now that we know the net working capital for each year, which one of these things can we calculate? Oh, come on. Yeah, we can look at the change in net working capital. So, by the way, this is freaky. I'm going to go to Insert, and I'm going to insert a symbol here, and that symbol, no. And that symbol will be the delta, which I think, there it is. And I'm going to say Insert, and everything looks fine until I start to type. And then it just all goes to hell. Now, the question that I want to know is, or ask, this has been going on since 2003 at least. Why haven't they fixed that? I mean, you think of all the versions of Excel that we've had since then, and they still haven't fixed that. Okay, so in the beginning, it's just going to be this amount right here. But after that, it's going to be equal to the current year's net working capital minus the previous year's net working capital. So there's no change in year 1, and then we have all sorts of changes. And of course, here at the end is going down, and then all the rest of the money goes back at the very end. By the way, in accounting, what do parentheses mean? Negative. How else do accountants show negative? Red ink, and the other is the good old-fashioned minus sign, right? So there are 3 ways that accountants show negative. Okay, in fact, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to insert some lines here. We're going to keep that separate. I'm going to recopy this up here because, as you can probably tell, this top thing is actually headed for OCF. And that's where we will get to. Okay, now let's see what else they say. You know, I think for today, that's probably all we need to do. Next time, we will finish this up, and then we'll finish up Chapter 8, and you will be good to go.